of our early pioneers as we explore the development of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. With your host, Mike Roberts, and historian Bill Barlee.
And as the miners go into the tunnel, we can start another Gold Trail in Ghost Town. Mike Roberts, Bill Barlee with you today. And today, this is going to be one of my favorite shows ever, because today we just take a look at some of the artifacts. You know, the everyday stuff of the history of this country, which is now getting very, very rare.
It's appreciated dramatically. When I started collecting at, 11 years old, Mike, pick up all sorts of this stuff. Now we have about $25,000 worth of various items and artifacts here. And, you know, it's very important that people understand a couple of things. First of all, that most of the items anywhere beyond 50 years old or 60 years old have some value. Some of those items, going back to the 1890s or earlier, have a great deal of value. And you have to enhance that value, you should have the provenance of the article. And the provenance of the article means the documentation. You should know where it came from. You should keep very, very close notes on that. You should be very, very precise on those notes, because this will enhance the value. And a lot of these things stay in the family. Indeed, they should. But people don't understand that. They think, okay, we got a collecting piece. They hang it on the wall. They forget where it came from. Doesn't work that way. It really makes a great deal of difference. Museums, of course, document, and that is called the provenance of an article, and any good collector does the same thing.
Okay. So as we talk about some of these things, you will probably at home say, gee, that looks a lot like something that I know Aunt Alice has got or something. Making sure that you know its origins, its dates, who owned it, where it's come from, that's just part of it. We're going to, in the next half hour, take a look at some remarkable pieces of artifacts and tell you the stories about where they came from. Don't go away. Towns, Mike Roberts and Bill Barlee here today talking about I consider them treasures, but artifacts of the time. Before we go to this artifact, I'll keep it hidden, we should have a picture which actually shows the people who are responsible for this artifact. Tell me about the people in this photograph.
Well, the people in this photograph, the shift boss is sitting down.
He is a giant of a guy.
Huge guy. Silver standard shift boss. And he sits down, everyone else stands and pays him due.
And they look like a bunch of pretty rough customers, too. I mean, they don't look like a gentle, sophisticated, caring lot.
Well, you wouldn't think that they were very, aware of their position
of
in
the
life.
Niceties of life.
That's right. And, but they were.
And this is an artifact which they provided for their boss.
Yeah. And this is interesting, because this comes from one of the most famous mines in Old Silverton. That's the Van Roy, which was originally called the Vancouver.
And there is actually engraved on the side, presented by the Van Roy mine employees to Mr. and Mrs. Robert Unson on the occasion of their marriage, May 28th, 1912.
Yeah. And this would be from the miners themselves as well.
Yeah.
Sterling silver, Berks, gold washed inside.
Now, when you say gold washed inside, that meant it was even snazzier. The sterling silver augmented with gold inside.
They went that extra mile and gold washed it.
Yeah, and it comes with a creamer.
Yep.
So we've got a creamer and a sugarer.
Yeah.
And in addition to being the nice inscription.
Probably worth, with that documentation or provenance, probably worth $400 or $500.
Now that's
ordinarily probably only worth $150.
Now where do these get picked up? Do you just pick these up in an antique store sitting on a shelf getting tarnished, or
came
what?
From an old friend of mine in Nelson who has a store and felt that they belonged in my collection. So,
yeah, and you felt
George
that
Coletti.
too?
I did too.
Well, very wise of you.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, next photograph. Just a great shot of one of the characters. This is an Indian constable. What's his name?
Long Alec or Long Alex. Called Long Alex in British Columbia, called Long Alec in the state of Washington. Indian constable, and he was a tracker. He was a marvelous marksman. He was a great rider. The guy was really an incredible, marvelous law officer.
And we have actually Long Alex's Colt revolver.
That's right. That's the one, and you'll see it in that crossover. And the Canadian lawmen used a crossover action to pick their revolvers up, so butt came out first. That's the revolver that is in the photograph of Long Alex and his wife.
And now, where would you find a thing like this? Because not long ago, Bill Miner's pistol was sold at auction for $16,000.
That's
Now,
right.
he's got to be the most famous criminal of the Old West in Canada.
Yes, probably so.
Yeah. So where would you find something like this? How would you
Well,
get the provenance of this item?
It was bought many decades ago. And I have the provenance. I have have the documentation of his will and so on, and the registration of the gun and all the rest of it. So it is definitely Long Alex. No doubt about it.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
The gun didn't always go in here, but for the purposes of our little conversation today, this is just perfect. Now, what do we got here?
Well, that's a bounty hunter's holster, and it's made by Main and Winchester makers, San Francisco, California.
So this would be kind of like saddlebags, eh? And it would go over the pommel of the horse,
right,
of the saddle.
Yeah, and a pretty hard-nosed, hard-edged customer would be riding the horse. He's a bounty hunter, and on one side, of course, is the
male.
Well, no, not the male at all. That's the wanted poster would be on one side.
Right.
If the man doesn't give up that way, he pulls out the revolver, and that's the end of the road. Usually dead or alive in many instances.
And there's where the revolver would sit. Now, this is a piece of work. This is embossed leather, a beautiful piece of work.
Hand-tooled perfectly. In fact, they're so good that people have to be careful if they're making spurious specimens of this now. That's an original. Came out of a trunk in Balfour, came into Nelson many years ago. This old friend of mine, George Coletti, sold me this item very reasonably, I think probably about a decade ago.
Maine and
Winchester
makers.
Yep.
And there it would be. The pommel would sit up there.
They would probably sell for, if people are wondering about value, and we're talking about values today, around $3,000 or $4,000.
Just sit up on the pommel of the horse right there, and if the guy didn't like it, this was out just like that.
That's the end of the road.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now that, to me, with all of the provenance, is a treasure because it was used at the time. You can nail it down to the person, and it squeaks.
That's right.
Ah, that's just lovely. Now there's a bounty. Let me see. Oh, we'll get to that a little bit later. We've got spurs here now. Spurs strike me as being something that would be almost a dime a dozen back then. But where do they all go to?
Several types of spurs. Working spurs, show spurs. These are show spurs, inlaid with silver, and you have the silver buttons on the side. They'd be much more valuable if they had the maker's name on them, like Garcia or something like that. These haven't, but they're still very valuable. Spurs like this routinely go for around $500 now. Now, an ordinary working spurs you can get for $30, $40, $50, $60.
Yeah.
But this type of spur with the silver in there, sometimes they're gold inlaid as well, really go up, especially if you know where they came from.
And they just jingle. They're just beautiful. Would the fact that this is TJ on the side of it, would that help us? Can you track that down?
Well, the spurs came from just across the line, but they're supposed to have drifted down from Canada. And actually, the branding iron came from Canada, so we think they're Canadian spurs.
So there's still, the jury's out, and if if somebody watching this would say, well, I know a TJ who wore those kind of spurs, that's when the connection between other collectors has to come into play.
Lots of TJ brands, unfortunately.
Is that right?
Yep.
So that'd be a brand, not the initials of the cowboy.
Initial of the cowboy and probably his brand as well.
And probably his brand as well. Okay.
Yep.
Now, going to some other areas, the Chinese connection in British Columbia left so many wonderful cultural events and objects around.
Everything. I've collected Chinese stuff, Mike, since I was about 14 years old. Yeah. And, in the last few years, I've really concentrated, the last 20 years, I should say. Yeah. And some of it's quite commonplace. There's an item you're picking up right now that is fairly commonplace. And you have to be careful of that, Mike, because,
This is the right way up?
That's right. That one means right way up.
Oh, that's what that means.
Yeah. Otherwise, it drops out on the floor.
A little braided bamboo or holder slides down. Yeah. And when you slide that down, this whole thing comes apart. Yeah. And what's in here...
right apart like that.
Like that. Yep. And this is a Chinese gold scale. This is just the suitcase for it. And if you
Ivory bar.
Yeah.
3 different weighing methods on it. Yeah. And there's the counterbalance. And this would be... these items are not very difficult to obtain right now. Probably worth around, I'd guess $100 to $150 is all. Becoming more...
well, they're so fragile. They're just,
they're rarer than they used to be, of course. And that came out of Yale, of course, which was an old an old gold town.
Yeah. Now, we got some photographs of Barkerville, for example, and you can see the Chinese in this photograph, and you can tell this is Chinatown in Barkerville way back when.
Big Chinatown in Barkerville, and a lot of very famous Chinese families. The Hong family, in fact, that big gold scales there, Mike.
Was the Hong family
which belonged to old Bill Hong, and I knew old Bill very well. He just died a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
He was a marvelous man, and mined all through that area. Did exceptionally well. And that's made probably in Canton or very close to Canton. I have two sets like that, very similar, perfectly balanced, and definitely Chinese weights, which are kind of an S weight or a caddy weight. And yeah, so and that's worth probably now $3,000 up, going up rather rapidly, the Chinese material.
There's so much degradable. I mean, those are leather thongs that are holding the brass plates, or what do you call those? The brass trays in place?
Weighing trays.
And so, and it's all been handmade. This stuff here, you can see, has been the work of a blacksmith at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just wonderful.
And yet the other is machine-made. The actual balance bar.
Balance bar.
Oh, you have to be very careful there. Machine-made.
So, that kind of thing, you must pretty well. If you've got how many?
I've got 20 sets of scales. I've got two somewhat like that.
You pretty much got the market on the scales.
No, but I've got good collection.
Yeah.
You know.
And other little things like this. This is a brass gold tray.
That's actually copper gold
tray.
You know, for pouring gold out of it. They wanted that contrast so they could see the gold and not leave any in the tray.
Perfect.
So the Chinese are very, very careful, of course.
And became rich as a result of their
Well, some
care.
of them did exceptionally well.
Yeah.
Exceptionally well.
Okay.
Best miners in the business.
Now, there is this game here. The fact that this has survived really amazes me.
Yeah.
What kind of a game is this?
Well, it's the original game. The Chinese called it the White Pigeon game because it's a lottery game. It gave rise to Keno. They call it White Pigeon game because the pigeon is a bird, and like all lotteries, your money flies away, just like a bird.
And each one of these...
Hand-carved, in reverse.
In reverse, because, I mean, these, if you were to put ink on them, they would make an impression on paper.
Right. What it did, they had 144 of these items, and they would make 144 numbers or symbols. That would be divided into 4 separate piles of 36 each, Mike. And then they'd draw out from under this. They would draw a little number. And you couldn't draw it with your hand. Draw with your hand.
This is a little brass sort of cover. This covers
right. They had to reach in with this because nobody trusted the fingers, and they'd split up a number. And if the number said 3, if that was 1, 2, or there were 4 piles, only 3, the third pile would stay there. That means 36 numbers. You would guess 10 times, and if you got 3 out of 36, or you'd probably get your money back. If you got 4, you get double your money back. If you got 5, you get probably 8 times your money back. If you got 6, you get 20 times your money back, and so on. And if finally at 9 or 10, you break the bank. But your chances of getting 9 or 10 out of 36 and having virtually no numbers in the other 3 piles would be almost infinitesimal.
And
just like a lottery.
Now, this photograph shows a bunch of Chinese miners around a little tent. Yeah. You figure that they're playing the White Pigeon game.
Oh, yes. They're
photograph.
watching each number, I'm quite sure, in that tent. We didn't see inside that tent. We can't see inside that tent now, Mike, but by golly, they're so interested, and they're not actually engaged. They're watching something there. They're watching the numbers that come off that pile.
Now, would you know precisely where this came from, or could this have come over from...
I know exactly where it came from. It came out of Yale on Front Street in the Chinese section, was probably owned by a Chinese merchant there, and the On Lee family had that at one time, maybe about 40 years ago. There are 2 sets in North America. One in San Francisco, I believe, in the Wells Fargo Museum. I have the other.
Well, it is such a wonder. It is such a wonder to see.
Yeah.
And have you learned to play the White Pigeon game now?
I know how to play it, but I have never played it.
But you have never played it. Okay.
I've even got the ink.
Have you got the ink
Yeah,
for
I
this?
have. Yeah.
Oh, gosh, okay. Now, the Indian component in out west is just a spectacular one, and we've done some conversations about it, but you have to know your stuff when you begin talking about original artifacts and original beadwork. Now, just looking at sort of the geometric beadwork on this, would you know its era?
Well, that's Blackfoot, almost certainly with the type of beads they're using. They tended to go to blues. And I don't think that's a lazy stitch. And these are original beads. You have to be careful of that as well.
Now, see, you got to know your beads, you got to know your stitches, you got to know your design.
Geometric design, so that's probably 1875 or before. Floral pattern came after that, so floral pattern on that piece, Mike.
Let's take a look at this floral
would
pattern.
be a beautiful piece. That's
Much more
Sue.
modern.
That's Sue, though. That came out of came out of a collection that came out of the Custer's Last Stand, or the Battle of the Greasy Grass, is another name to call it by. And when they came over into Canada, this is one of the pieces they brought over into Canada.
Now, they made a decision, the native artists and artisans made a decision to go from geometric to floral. I mean, can you make that? This is a little more modern piece than that.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Although the battle was 1876.
Okay. Now, you've got another piece here. This is, looks like, is that dentalian? No, that can't
No,
be.
it
What
isn't.
is that?
It's actually trade bead, made by the trading companies, the Hudson Bay Company, the XY Company, American Fur Trading Company, Northwest, and so on. But this was very, very nice. Very, very nice item. It's,
And what is this?
It's a breastplate. And you'll see this, this photograph will show some of the Indians all lined up here. This is taken by H. Pollard of Calgary just after the turn of the century. And this is a very, very valuable item. Probably, with the documentation, probably valued around $5,000 to $7,000 Canadian. So, and almost impossible to replace. You have to again be careful to make sure that the beads are original.
Yeah.
I wouldn't clean them up. I haven't cleaned these up, as you'll see.
They're
Look very carefully at the leather. Look at the type of cloth that's tied into the bone, and or the pipes, as they call them.
Yeah.
And,
each one of these is
yeah.
a turned bone.
Yes, it is. Yeah, by the Hudson Bay Company, probably in that case. And again, Plains Indians, probably Blackfoot.
Yeah.
I've got Cree Blackfoot and blood material as well.
It is. I mean, it is so substantial.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I would like to have sort of a modern reproduction to see what changes. I mean, when you take a look at the leather, it's developed a shine associated with age. When you look at the cloth, it's developed that sort of dustiness associated with age. And each bone has got that little patina.
Oh, yeah, it has. It's marvelous. They had a marvelous ability to match colors, which we don't seem to have. And they varied from nation to nation. The Blackfoot differed from the Cree, and the Cree differed from the Sioux, and the Sioux from the Cheyenne, and so on. So it's really quite interesting, Mike.
Okay, I'm going to take a break here, okay, so that I can get all of this stuff off me, but we'll come back and take a look at a few more artifacts and give you the caveat emptor. In other words, if you're buying these, what do you look for? And if you own these things, how do you assess the value of what you own? We'll talk about that right after we take this break. We're talking about artifacts today and how precious they are. Even if they are not in themselves valuable, they are precious in that you're holding something from another era. Now, some of the stuff you have is precious because it's your family's.
Yeah.
This photograph, tell me about this photograph from where?
Well, this photograph shows my late mother, my late aunt, one of my aunts still living, my grandfather, R.G. Ritchie, and he carried everything in that big general store.
Ritchie's General Store.
Cascade City.
Cascade City.
1890s, right till the 1940s. It was there for almost 50 years. And this is one of the items. And
so this came out when?
It'd be 1930s, early 1930s.
And there it is, Ritchie's. R.G. Ritchie's, Cascade, B.C. Ask for Ogilvy's Royal Household Flower. Now, this was probably 5 cents. They put it in a flower, and everybody had one.
Worth $200 now.
$200.
Varies from about $35 for those jugs to $200. Any ghost town stuff, Mike, the ghost town stuff, Sandon, Cascade, Phoenix, and the mining town stuff, Caslow, Rosslyn, and so on, going up dramatically. Dramatically.
So much for a freebie in a product in the old days. Now, my dad's got some stone crocks around his house, but they've only got 3-gallon signs written on them.
That doesn't mean much.
Doesn't
Probably
mean
$15
much.
or $25. This one's about $350, $400. Hudson's Bay Company with the Hudson's Bay crest, of course, on it, and in perfect shape, no cracks, and that makes quite a difference. So that would be an item that you, and Hudson's Bay is very collectible. The Americans are collecting Hudson's Bay very, very rapidly, and we're trying to keep it in Canada.
How do you know you got the real McCoy? I mean,
I came out of Phoenix.
Yeah, but how do you know you got the real
Because
McCoy?
I remember documenting it when I got it.
But say I was wandering around and I saw one of these things, how would I assume that it was from the era that we're talking about?
Ask the person you buy it from, and if you trust them, then you put it down. If you don't, then it's just another wall hanger.
It's
But
just
still nice. It's still nice.
It is still nice, isn't it? Let me go one more time here. It's not enough maybe to just have one of these tins. These were wonderful tins. They were artworks.
Came in 3 colors, green, blue, red. This is Johnny Canuck, worth about $200 now. Used to be picked up for 10 years ago, $15. So it's gone up dramatically.
They were blue, red, and what?
Blue, red, and green.
And does that
different types, various sizes.
Yeah. And if you had the whole set of these tins, then
Which
you've
I
really
have,
got
yes.
something.
I've got a complete set of those, and I got one of the green and one of the blue. But
Okay.
I haven't got the complete sets of the others.
Now, if it's tin, I mean, you can pretty well keep it, but some of the
Illustrate.
great artifacts, and I thank you for letting me touch this.
Yes.
This is a certificate of shares, capital stock, the Great Caribou Gold Company.
It's the rarest stock certificate in the world, evidently. It isn't worth anything as far as a stock certificate is concerned, but the artwork on it is marvelous. One sold in Germany for around $2,000 Canadian, just over, I believe. And it'll show you the inside of that certificate, and it really is quite remarkable.
Look at the glint of the gold leaf printing here.
Yep.
And look at, the engraving
Yeah.
is just spectacular.
But the inside is much better.
Yeah. Let's just open this up here without tearing anything.
And there it shows you the nuggets and the underground workings and all the rest of it. And there was a wing dam, of course, and wing dam was the favorite ground of certain individuals, such as Unversact, who was one of the biggest thieves in the Caribou. And I have no hesitation saying that because I have all his documentation. And this one is made out to a reverend. And he picked on widows and reverends and police chiefs pretty well, and doctors.
Is that right?
Yeah.
H.W. Oswald, 760 shares of capital stock that...
And on the back he signs Reverend Oswald.
Is that right?
Indeed he does.
And each one of those shares...
Most stock certificates, Mike, are $5, $10, $15 at that age. You know, this is 1917. In the 1890s, they go back to $25 or $30, maybe $50, depending what the stock certificate looks like. This was a remarkable stock certificate. And like everything else, you have to be extremely cautious that you don't have a spurious specimen. And with paper things, newspapers are fine. You can collect newspapers, you can collect stock certificates, but again, you have to be careful because there are unscrupulous individuals in the business.
To sell you things that are not ancient in the name of ancient. But I'm also interested that there are so many wonderful artifacts in the hands of people today, and you could get them ripped off. Because how do you know what the value is?
Well, I would suggest people go at it very, very carefully and don't sell in a hurry. You know, ask people who are fairly knowledgeable and do not sell in a hurry. Very, very important. You might find something in the trunk you think is valueless. It might not be at all. Ivory poker chips, $100 each now. Ivory, not composition. Maybe $200 each. Depends where they came from, what the documentation or provenance is.
And you have to find a person who will give you the information who you can trust.
Yes, you have to be very, very cautious about that. And there are some dealers that are as good as their word. There are some who are perhaps not quite as good as that.
And I think to myself, and I've had this experience now, people coming to my family saying, well, I'll give you $50 to take that off your hands.
Caveat emptor comes into mind there.
Yeah.
Let the buyer beware.
All right. You have treasures in your home. I mean, your parents treasured them, you treasured them, and they are treasures, so if you're planning on parting with them, make sure you get what they're worth for them. Thanks for being with us. We'll be back again next time with another Gold Trails and Ghost Towns. Bye-bye.